All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the Psychedelic Scene interview with Dr. Rachel Harris. Dr. Rachel Harris is a psychologist who had a practice for several decades, and she also did early training in the 1970s with the Esalen Institute with Stan Grof and a lot of those pioneers in this new wave of psychedelics. She is also the author, she's the author of Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety. And her new book, which just came out this month, Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. Rachel, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Could I possibly correct you? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was at Esalen in the late 60s. It was
Okay.
like 6 or 7 years before Stan moved there. That's how old I am.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in private practice for about 35, 40 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and be interested in hearing about your experience at the Esalen Institute and the how the psychedelic journeys that you had back then shaped your future and who you are today.
That's absolutely true. Um, uh, it was a little wild back then in the 60s.
Yeah.
And drugs were readily available. And I didn't do the big crazy music concerts. I didn't do that, but I did them in a psycho-spiritual way in nature. But then when I started interviewing the women who have been working underground all these years, all of a sudden I realized I had never done sort of the standard protocol where you're lying down with earphones and eye shades where all your attention is turned inward. I had never done that. And here I am interviewing them about their underground practice where that's the protocol they use. So of course, I arranged to do a ceremony with one of the women, and I did MDMA, which it's ecstasy. I thought this will be great. I'd been working with ayahuasca for 15 years. It's a tough medicine. It's not fun exactly. I've never heard anyone call it fun. I think at least my mantra is during the ceremony, I'm never doing this again. I mean, this is what I'm,
Yeah.
I'm experiencing things. And then there's this running statement, not again. So I thought, oh, MDMA, this will be fun. Well, you never know what's going to happen in a journey. I went right to an ayahuasca kind
Wow.
of realm. I mean, that's the realm I'd been going to for 15 years. It was very familiar and it's a little dark. And so that journey was all about death and dying for the most part. That's not a typical MDMA session,
Oh.
but it is a typical ayahuasca session. So, we don't know exactly. There's nothing predictable about these medicines. And there's a lot we as a culture and as scientists and as therapists, there's a lot we have to learn about them. I mean, I feel very humbled by how little we know in some ways. And yet here we are diving into.
Yeah, and would you say the complexity of these experiences and these medicines makes it very hard to do the standard double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that today's modern science experiments really rely upon for understanding, especially with ayahuasca? It's so complex and there's so many different variations of it. Like, how would we begin to control for all these variables and understand more about them? Is a limitation of modern science these days, or is there?
Yes, the answer is yes to all of the above. And I think in the ayahuasca book, I say something about some scientists had devised a study and they were going to use freeze-dried ayahuasca in pill form. And this is what they've used in Spain to do research. And it's a way to control the dosage. And they were going to do the ceremonies with indigenous shamans. So the indigenous shaman took one look at the pill and they said, the spirit is gone. You can't work with the pill. So that, so much for that. So that's part of, I love that word complexity. That's part of the challenge of working with ayahuasca. And I think part of the reason they started with medicines that are easier to measure, like MDMA for PTSD and psilocybin for end of life. So it's working a little better, a little easier. Ayahuasca, I think, will be one of the last ones to really be studied in those kind. I mean, there are some studies going on, but they're using the freeze dried in Brazil and in Spain.
Yeah, this is a topic we'll cover later in the discussion, but the Telegram, was it the Telegram absorption scale?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a measure of like how you absorb these experiences. Are you like
You know,
able?
it was actually developed to measure your capacity to be hypnotized. That's what it was originally developed for. If you get a high score, you're easily hypnotized. And one of the questions is when you go to a movie theater, are you absorbed into the movie? Do you sort of forget your surroundings and enter into the film? And if you score, now this is my theory. We haven't done the research yet. I mean, this is just my theory that if you score high on that absorption scale, I think you need a lower dose. I don't think you, and if you're heavily defended and you score low on that absorption scale, that you don't shift states of consciousness easily, then you need a little more of a boost. You need a little more help to take off, so to speak. So I think, we have a lot to learn about the dosages. And just this morning, I was reading a paper about psycholytic
Mm,
uh, therapy, which was well established in Europe. It's the Americans and the Canadians also who developed this psychedelic approach of a high dose and that the mystical experience is everything. They were using it in Europe with much smaller doses, not microdoses, but smaller doses where the person retained an observing witness, where their ego remained intact, and they could remember more what happened during the ceremony, and they could reflect on their experience even during the journey. So it was better, they felt, for a therapeutic process. We haven't even taken a look at that seriously in this country yet.
yeah, yeah. I got to be honest. I fell into the trap that you always needed the mystical experience, and I thought that was like entirely why people are getting sustained results in these therapies. I fell into that trap, when I first started studying these too. Um, and I think I probably have a very low Telegram absorption score. I usually tend to need very high doses before I can start to feel the presence of spirits or anything, or to see visuals. But there was one time where it was really strong for me. When I did something called pharmawaska one time. It's just DMT and an MAOI. I think we used Harmaline. And and it was one of the most visual experiences I've ever had, but I felt this feminine spirit there. And she was speaking to me saying, I need to be a responsible individual in this lifetime, responsible for myself especially, and that I need to work on improving my empathy skills. And I felt that throughout the entire journey. And I don't usually hear those kind of things in most of these journeys myself.
But did you take
Um,
the advice? What did you do with the advice?
I introspected on it for a while and thought, how do I improve my ability to empathize with others? And I felt that would require a lot of introspection. Um, it would require going out there more and having conversations with all sorts of people, different kinds of people who are different than me, and listening. I think that's the biggest
Yeah,
one.
that's a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah. Sometimes I have a habit of like just wanting to talk and talk and talk, and then when someone says something, responding instead of just listening. Um, so that
That's a good
was,
one. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, one of my original questions was, can you change your telegram absorption scale, or is it pretty fixed? Because I would love to one day, you know, do a lot more ayahuasca ceremonies and, feel take in the message from these unseen others and get more value from those.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of things to say. We don't really know if we can train ourselves to change the absorption scale. We don't know if it's a fixed variable, but there's a lot we don't know as psychologists and as researchers. I mean, we used to think there were five personality variables that were consistent throughout a life. And then they found, this is part of the studies at Hopkins, they found that one of those variables, openness, changed after a psilocybin experience. It's not supposed to change. So, we don't really know. But do you listen to music a lot?
Hmm.
Yeah. So, that's another, maybe you don't disappear into a movie in a movie theater. I don't know when the last time you were in a movie theater, but maybe you can disappear into music. And that sort of, it's that disappearing of self into something else. That's that shifting a state of consciousness. And I think you can practice that. The women I interviewed, the women elders for the Swimming in the Sacred book, they seem to be very good at this. They had a natural capacity for it. They had childhood experiences where they had, without any drugs or anything, experienced um, unusual states of consciousness. Actually, some of them experienced entities. I mean, they really shifted their reality. So they seem to be very good at it. And I talked to one, about, well, maybe you don't need such a big dose. She said, that's right. I like those lower doses. And then there's this pause, and I'm listening. I don't say anything. And she says, but I like to fly. So that's what these women are like. They've done all different levels of dosages and all different medicines. And I think they're very courageous and and strong. So it's very interesting to me. But I interviewed this guy. He was in graduate school to be a PhD psychologist. And he told me about a bad time he was having. And grandmother ayahuasca said to him, I can't even say it. Such an obvious thing. You have to stop doing cocaine. Duh. And I said the same thing to him. I just said to you, did you listen to her? And he said no. And it took me a couple years to come around. So he was also a young guy in his 20s. I think she has very good advice for young guys in their 20s about it's time to grow up and be responsible. She's the kind of a tough grandmother that way.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think it was Medrit in the book, you mentioned you had asked her something along the lines, is this what the whole psychedelic experience is about? Is it about learning to be responsible for yourself? And she responded, absolutely, that's what all of this is about, to be responsible to yourself and to the world, I think.
You heard that, but it was actually one of the elders I asked. It was
Oh, my bad,
the
yeah.
woman I call the eldest of the elders, and she is quite remarkable. So I think you got her energy, even though it's not an
Yeah.
unseen other. She's a woman, but she's in her late 80s now.
Oh, well.
And and that, I think that quote, she said the exact quote was, you to be responsible to yourself and to humanity. And you
Yeah.
get a sense of how big her vision is. And that's typical of these women who worked underground. This is part of what I mean, that they were priestesses, or that they are priestesses, because they're still working. And that they have a bigger vision than just individual healing. And they have a sense of, healing for humanity, for all living beings, for the planet. It's a really big spiritual vision, not just individual healing. And the research that they're doing as they're figuring out how to do double-blind studies, they're about symptom reduction in as cost-effective an
Hmm.
approach as possible. So it's much more compact and limited, And and that's a whole different way of holding the medicines. And I hope our culture learns to hold the medicines in a lot of different ways, in purely sacred ways, as well as medical ways. So I think we have a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's yeah, today now companies are trying to produce drugs that mimic the therapeutic effect of psychedelics, but don't have any psychedelic experience whatsoever. And one of these class of drugs are called psychoplastinogens. They're supposed to induce neuroplasticity in the brain and make people more receptive to change, but without any experience whatsoever. And how do you feel about that? I mean, I'm all good for developing new things, and if they work, that's good.
Yeah, really.
I
I'm
just,
all for neuroplasticity.
I just wonder if
I,
we're missing something
oh, you think we're missing
there.
something?
I feel
I
like the
have.
experience is so central. I feel like the experience is so valuable that taking that out of the equation is we're going to lose something.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, maybe it will, if it helps people who are suffering, who have been dealing with treatment resistant PTSD or depression, I don't want to limit
Yeah.
treatment for those people. And it would be a lot cheaper because it would be a faster journey. I'm not sure you can call it a journey, but it's not a sacred use.
Hmm.
They're
No.
not even entheogens anymore. So we would lose a lot big time. But I'm I'm old, so I'm making a conscious effort to be open to the use of these chemicals and medicines and entheogens in all sorts of ways that I would never have imagined.
Yeah, one value I could see from it, other than the cost and avoiding challenging trips and all that, is for people with the history of psychosis or a family history, we tend to, you know, for good reason, not, we filter them out in the research
They're
studies.
excluded. Yeah,
And I wonder if the psychoplastinogens, non-hallucinatory ones, can help those individuals because I feel like the reason that can help these experiences can induce a state of psychosis or trigger, I should say, because I feel like it's probably a latent psychosis that could be triggered by a lot of different things. Could not having the experience help these individuals?
that's a good question, and we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very good question. And these medicines are very safe, but that doesn't mean everybody's safe. And the elders in the community, not just the women I interviewed, but people who've been around this community for decades, half a century basically, if you want to know the whole truth. Um, Everybody knows someone who's been permanently harmed and their life has been changed. So they're not entirely without risk, but some people have a bad reaction to Tylenol. So, no drug is without some risk,
Hmm.
but we do have to be very careful. And this is one of the things I say to people. These women who are working underground have they've established relationships with medical doctors so they can consult with medical professionals when they do an intake, and they do very careful medical intakes before they work with someone. And my warning to people when they say, well, how do I know who I should go to for a journey? Is if someone has not done a complete medical history with you and asked really tough questions and gone over everything with a fine-tooth comb, don't go to that ceremony because that's an indication that they're not being careful. So I know these women are very careful. They've sent me their questionnaires that people have to fill out, and they're horribly long. I mean, they're like 16 pages long. They
Oh,
really
wow.
ask a lot of questions.
Are those
So
online that people who
no,
want it?
no, 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 no,
Okay, good.
nothing public. Mm-mm.
Okay.
These women are very well hidden, and so it's not easy to find them and get to them. And so everything is done with utmost confidentiality because they have risked their
Yeah.
whole lives to be working with these medicines. And what they say is, of course, they first worked on themselves for years and years. And basically, they felt called, and that these entheogens helped me so much that how could I not help other people? And that's really what they said to me. So I just want to be clear. I didn't work this way. I went to graduate school and, practiced as a therapist, a regular psychotherapist. But these women are not therapists. They're sort of like priestesses of the mysteries. I mean, they've been hidden. They have separate lives where they might work in some straight kind of situation, but, they're doing this underground practice. And so they have doctors that they can relate to, but they also have therapists that they can refer to, therapists who are familiar with expanded states of consciousness, and they talk to each other. They have colleagues that they talk to, which is very different than a young person who doesn't have much experience, has not worked on themselves that much, and people have come up to me at conferences and say, grandmother ayahuasca told me I'm ready to lead ceremonies. And I say, oh, that's, I'm like, oh my God, that's wonderful. How many ceremonies have you been in? Oh, 5 or 6. It's
Yeah.
like, no, no. One of the women I interviewed did training with an indigenous shaman. So after year 6, the indigenous shaman said, you're ready to sing. The Shipipo shamans sing
Mhm.
Icaros that are healing. She said, no, I'm not ready. And so she sat at his elbow, right next to him in ceremony. He sang, and she sang a nanosecond right behind him.
Wow.
And they did that for a year. And then she said, I'm ready to sing. So during that year, they could talk about, well, did you see that? What happened there? Because the shaman are trained to see but they're seeing energy into the body, and they're seeing the effects of the Icaros. So she could compare her shamanic vision as it was developing and refining, sitting right next to the master. And that this is also missing in our culture, this
Yeah.
sense of apprenticeship. So the women are there as peers and colleagues and consultants. So this is what psychotherapists do. Often they have peer supervision groups where experienced therapists meet once a month and talk about clients and their own countertransference or
Hmm.
any problems they're having. I was in private practice alone. I had people I could call. If I needed to talk about something, I was concerned about something. I was alone in my office, but I never felt alone. I could always call a colleague. And this is very important for people working underground.
Yeah, I had no, yeah, now that you say that, I didn't think about it. I didn't know they had contact with like doctors and psychologists that they can refer their patients to. That's really important,
Yes, it's
you know.
very important. Yeah. And
And yeah, go
well,
on.
one of the elders told me a story of an emergency during a journey. She was with a client. She'd done a careful medical history check, and some emergency came up. I don't remember what it was, but she knew because she was very experienced, she had to take him to the emergency room. This is a difficult thing to do
Yeah.
because you're walking in and admitting that you're doing something illegal. She went in with him, talked to the doctor with this person, and she was just lucky. The doctor understood what was going on. She was just lucky that he was simpatico and he didn't report her and he treated the client. But what level of expertise she has to know
Mhm.
it's time to go to an ER and I have to take this risk of incarceration because my client is at stake.
Mhm.
And this is something for anyone who's thinking of working underground to consider this kind of situation. How would they know when they had to go, and how would they face it?
And some states have Good Samaritan laws, but not all. Good Samaritan laws are laws like if you're, taking drugs and you realize somebody is in a medical emergency and you take them to the hospital, that you'd be safeguarded from legal repercussion.
Yes, some do. Does that mean if you've given them the drug?
Yeah, I think so. I'm,
So
I,
this would be good for anybody to know, depending on the state they're in.
yeah, I'm in
This is the kind of thing that I thought about.
Yeah, I'm in Arizona and I don't think we have any Good Samaritan laws here. So you know, turning somebody in would be really risky, uh, legally, I think.
Right. Yeah, these are serious things to think about.
And yeah, and she had that skill to be able to discern that they
Exactly.
should go to the emergency room. Is that related to the somatic? Um, is that related to the somatic sense?
That this the intuition that I talked about, that there's a somatic knowing, a different way of knowing. I
Yeah,
think that's part of it, but it's also just plain years of experience and having seen a lot of different people. So that's hard won experience. And you know that and the many of the women talked about, I know in my bones. They have kind of a certainty in their bones. It's a sense of knowing deep down in a somatic kind of embedded kind of way inside of them. It's very interesting how they talked about it. Um, but you know, they've studied intuition in psychotherapists as well. And part of that study, they found, this is a really interesting way to think about it, is that it's always a function also of experience. And for the psychedelic elders, it's their own experience of their own work, and then it's their experience of working with others. But for straight psychotherapists, they realized that the intuition also told the therapist what not to do, which is always good. You know,
yeah,
it's good to know what not to do.
yeah.
So it's not just what to do, but also what not to do. Don't say that. Always helpful.
Yeah, there sometimes people say things like it's going to be all right, don't worry. Um,
Uh,
and it sounds good, but
yeah, not always.
yeah, is that somatic sense and all of that somatic empathy and all of those things. First, can you talk about those and can those things also be improved? Because I feel like, I've always had difficulty with like nonverbal cues and feeling energy from people. I feel like that is something I would want to improve as well, just like the telegram absorption score. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, not much has been written about the somatic experience of psychedelic journeys. You know, so much is happening sort of visually or in our heads or we're out of our bodies.
Hmm.
But well, ayahuasca especially is very somatic. I mean, you know, even after you vomited, it's still somatic.
Yeah.
So, you know, different medicines are different, but they open up the inner world, which includes the inner sensing of the body and the inner realms inside. And it becomes even blended how much the inner world extends out into the cosmos. I mean, because the boundary has dissolved. So the medicines themselves teach about an inner world, but there are also disciplines like any of the martial arts and yoga that develop that inner sensing. And so it is a capacity that can be refined. And it's very different from the Western approach to, you know, working out body work, you know, how far can you run,
Hmm.
you know, playing sports, competitive sports. Those are it's the skeletal muscular systems. The inner sensing is very visceral. So it's a very different kind of inner kinesthetic sense. And in the academic literature, there are a lot more articles being written about it, but they tend to be boring and somewhat philosophical. But it's as if we're just learning about this inner capacity. And the women have, uh, uh, because of all the work they've done on themselves and in these altered states, they have a very refined sense of their own intuition. And it's very much a somatic intuition.
That's good. Um, so you focused this book on women.
Yeah, I wanted, should
Um,
I say something about that?
yeah.
Yeah. So my confession is I didn't want to listen to the men. So, so I have a century or so of listening to men. But the quote you pulled out when you took some notes from the book, that was I think women make better guides than men. They have menstruated and suffered, and they're better at suffering than men. That came from a male shaman,
Oh, yeah.
a Westerner, but trained with an indigenous shaman. That was a man who was saying that. So I interviewed his wife. I talked to him, and I wrote down this quote. But it was the wife I was really interviewing for many hours. But he was acknowledging that the women have a sensitivity and they don't get in between the medicine and the person. They don't interfere with the process, in other words. And I sort of felt that the women talked more about their ongoing relationships with plant spirits, unseen others, that they were sort of more connected to that world that where they received guidance.
Yeah,
So
that makes a lot.
that's why I chose to talk to the women. And also, I just, culturally, I have to say, the women are silenced twice. They're silenced because women are often silenced, and
Hmm.
then they're silenced because they're working underground and they really can't speak.
Yeah, if you go to, like, I just went to my first psychedelic conference in Phoenix a couple of weekends ago, and it was almost the vast majority of the speakers were men at the conference.
I'm shocked.
Um,
Uh,
okay. Yeah, sorry about that. We had a little technical error. All right. Um, yeah, we
well,
were talking.
yeah, I can, now that you've reminded me, I can pick up on women. And that is that there was a book just published, I think in 2022, in honor of Stan Groff. And so it was edited by a man, and there were, I don't know, 20 chapters. And I think there were about 22 authors or something like that. I'm maybe there were 15 chapters, but 22 authors. Three chapters had women authors. One was the second author. So the first author on the chapter was a man. Another was dead for a number of years. And then the third chapter by a woman was actually first author. But all the rest were men. And that's 2022. So I don't know when it's going to really significantly change, but it's time for it to
Mhm.
change.
Yeah, how can we help in that regard?
There, I thought about this because there were a group of women meeting to talk about how can we use philanthropic funds to support women, and the women have to get PhDs.
Okay.
Because they have to be on the research teams and they have to be writing their own grants and funding. And my career is really based on two apprenticeships with elder women, having nothing to do with psychedelics. One was about a type of body work that's not all that relevant right now, but the other one was a research mentor. And she was head of a research department and had a PhD. And she taught me everything I know about research, basically. I was with her for a decade. And so it was very valuable to have women mentors in my career and in my life. And these kind of mentor relationships. They're very familial. My research mentor at one point said to me, I had always thought of her as a good mother, someone who was just always encouraging and kind and supportive. And she said to me, I always thought of you as a younger sister.
I like that.
But it was very familial, and I say, I never wrote a sentence that left that office that she hadn't looked at. So really, everything I know about research I learned from her. And then when I did an ayahuasca study that was published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs in 2012, my co-author was her mentor. My mentor died young, And but her mentor was a nationally recognized psychologist, and he co-authored that paper with me. And I called him, this is a very straight psychologist, won all kinds of national awards. And I asked him, do you want to do a research study on ayahuasca? And when I explained it's an illegal drug, he just said, sure. I think he was 80 years old at the time. So he was very open. So, but women mentors have really been the foundation in my career life. But I wanted to pick something up that you said because I loved the way you put it. You sent me some written material earlier, and here was your question. Has genuine psychedelic integration been downgraded by our current medicalized model of psychedelic therapy? And I just thought, hooray, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Because, to be cost effective, they have to limit the number of therapy sessions you can get, including the number of integration sessions. So people get maybe 3 after a journey, maybe 4, very limited. And I've heard that some of the subjects in the studies are requesting more integration sessions. They want more opportunity to work on things. And so I think, yes, they are being downgraded and in an attempt to save money. And I understand that that's a practical necessity. But the women elders working underground, they work so differently. First of all, they're not doing the therapy sessions. They do preparation sessions before, they clarify intentions. They don't do that. They do some so-called integration afterwards. It's not really very much. And if somebody needs more, they're inclined to refer them to someone. Or if it's something where they feel unfinished from a ceremony, the underground practitioner might say, well, maybe do another ceremony in a month and see what happens. It's a very different process. I mean, therapists in private practice always say yes when someone wants to come in. This is how the business runs.
Yeah.
But the women working underground don't see integration as something that gets done. Because they're working their whole lives with these medicines. So it's an unfolding process that continues throughout life. And I use the example of Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD 25. He lived to be 102. He did an acid trip when he was 97. I hope I can tie my own shoes if I hit 97. So you get a sense of this is a whole lifetime of unfolding. And there was one woman I interviewed, and she's turning 100 this summer. And she said, well, I had my last journey when I was 85. She's not an underground therapist. I had my last journey when I was 85. I'd love to do another one. So, it's a whole different way of holding the medicines, that they are part of life and part of different stages of life. And so the concept of integration as being a few sessions or a finite period doesn't really make sense, because there's an unfolding and a flow that's happening with the help, with the assistance of the entheogen.
Yeah, I know even Aldous Huxley. What happened?
I was just saying, are you back to your notes?
Oh,
But go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at what I wrote down about psychedelic integration. It was, I lost it here, but I'll get it in a second. But Aldous Huxley, I mean, he took LSD on his deathbed.
His wife gave him an IM injection.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, somebody who wants to work with these things for the rest of my life, I was like, that sounds like a really good way to end it and open you up to the death.
Isn't it quite a story?
And yeah, what did you think about that?
Well, I thought he was very brave. They're finding, NYU is doing the psilocybin studies with terminal cancer patients, and they're finding that the people who are terminal, who are facing death, have less pain, less discomfort, and they're more open to being present with their loved ones. They're less depressed.
Yeah, that's really good because the early studies, right, in the 50s and 60s was using LSD for end-of-life distress.
Yeah.
Was it Bill Richards who helped with some of those research studies, or
He was working at the Maryland Psychiatric Institute. He was there in the 60s.
yeah, and that's what was some of the inspiration for the psilocybin studies in the early 2000s with people with terminal cancer
Yeah.
uh, patients. Yeah, one of the things you talk about in this book is preparing for death with the substances, and Shulgin had written something about that as well. Um,
Yeah, she was from a slightly different take on it. She was married to Sasha Shulgin, who developed MDMA and dozens of other psychotropic drugs. These it's a famous couple. And she worked mostly with MDMA while it was still legal with clients. And she would have them make it in part of her preparation in seeing someone. She would have them enter an agreement with her that even if I see the death door, I will not go through it, because she said, there the option opens up to die during a ceremony, and she's saying that will harm you and it will harm me, and so you make an agreement basically not to go there, to do the journey and to come back.
hmm.
Um, it's a very serious conversation, isn't it, to really consider this,
Does that happen? I mean, I heard something many years
because
ago. Oh, my bad. I think you cut out for a second. I heard something many years ago. Not, I kind of just dismissed it. It didn't sound right to me, but I heard sometimes people have like an experience with death in their dreams, and that sometimes manifests itself in reality. And it didn't sound correct. But is that what she was talking about? Like maybe if you go and experience, or you're about to experience death in one of these experiences, that it's best to, stop and turn around,
well, you
or
got the stop and turn around correct. I don't think it's the same as dying in a dream. We don't know much about that, do we?
no.
Uh, no, but this is literally about, you make a choice to come back during this journey. Your commitment is to come back. And that's what he was wanting, that promise. This is also self-preservation for somebody working underground.
Yeah, very true. And going back to psychedelic integration, um, you said you'd prefer to call it lifelong learning about how to be human, how to inhabit our bodies, and how to realize our interconnectedness than to use that term or something. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. And you had some, I think that was the medicalized model, some cynical view with how the medicalized model was practicing it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I think lifelong learning is what the underground women elders really represent. And they work with people who might regularly do a journey once a year or every 6 months. These people are not doing something every weekend. It's very careful, and the women elders, the psychedelic guides, they're looking for the person's life to change, to be unfolding. They don't keep doing journeys with someone who continues to be stuck.
mm,
So they watch for that. And or they don't do journeys with someone who wants to do journeys, or calls up and says, I want to have a mystical experience. And there's all this, hype about mystical experiences. They don't want to hear that. This is an ongoing process, and people use these medicines at different times in their life for different purposes.
yeah. And I want to go back because think this is really important about the focus on women. I think one thing that we've lost in our Western society, and I might be wrong about this, but I think a lot of the history of Christianity and Roman Catholicism and their patriarchal structures kind of, made it much more male-centric. But if you go back to the ancient mysteries, like the Greek mysteries, and Brian Mudrescu talks about this in The Immortality Key, it was priestesses, it was women who were the ones, facilitating these trips and preparing the brews and medicine.
That's right. They had the secret recipes they were preparing. Yeah, that they were guiding. And that's the role model that these women are following. And we
Yeah,
don't really have a legitimate above ground role model in our culture for that. And Brian has said, everybody's asked him, well, have you done a journey yet? And
yeah,
he keeps saying no, because he wants to do it in a sacred way. And we don't really offer that at this point. He wants to do it, and he's a lawyer. He wants to do it in a legal way. And we don't have a legal, really sacred way to do it. Maybe things will change, as some of the laws change. But we're having trouble figuring out how to train people quickly because the women elders were trained, they learned how to work in these realms over many years. We don't have time for that anymore. So we have internet trainings. And, people have maybe one or two experiences with a drug or a medicine. And it's very hard. It takes a long time to have experience with a whole range of medicines at a whole range of dosages. So you're kind of in a rush right now. And this is the way it is.
yeah. One of Anne Shulgin's, going back to her, one of her rules, right, was that never give a medicine that you've to somebody that you've never taken yourself. And today
Right.
you could facilitate ketamine without never having done ketamine before. And I'm afraid, the same's going to go on with psilocybin and MDMA.
Yeah.
Um,
And one experience is not enough.
no.
You really need to develop an experience of the whole territory.
Yeah, what I love that MAPS is doing, Rick Doblin's organization, doing the PTSD studies with MDMA through the FDA trials. One thing I love is that they offer the ability to have an MDMA therapy session as part of the
Yeah.
therapy training.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
built it in. And that's one.
yeah, but it's still like an option. I'm sure there will be a
Yes.
lot of therapists who choose not to, and yeah, that we're missing something there. And I'm sure, the therapy sessions will still have a lot of positive effects with even those therapists, but I feel like they could be even more valuable having had the experience. Would you agree?
Yes. That's an That's amazing. The same sort of thing came up in a different slant, and that is, I said to one of the women elders, these so-called psychedelic therapists, they may not only have they maybe not done more than one psychedelic journey themselves, but they might never have had any therapy. The psychedelic elder who's very experienced in her realm, she said, how is that possible? How can you be a therapist without having been in your own therapy? I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. That's so, not every therapist has worked on themselves and done their own therapy. And 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 what I say to people is get as much experience as you can in these other realms and also in your own therapy and your own work on yourself. That is the only way to go. And one of the women I was interviewing, we were sitting in she had a little studio out in the garden, and we spent the afternoon there. And as it was becoming dusk, and I was getting ready to leave, she said, and now I'm going to drink some ayahuasca. And I said, what? What are you doing? She said, well, I'm going to serve it tomorrow, and I need to experience this batch. So this is a woman who had trained for years with an indigenous shaman. She's worked for years, I mean, decades and decades, but this was a new batch, and she wanted to know this batch before she served it to anybody else. So it's not just about serving something you haven't journeyed, but serving this particular batch of plant medicine. So that was her evening. I left, went and had dinner. And she did her own journey.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is a really good wisdom for anybody thinking about being underground guides, is to
Yeah.
test every batch, and to sit with it.
So
And
this is a high level of integrity that's self-generated because nobody's, super watching over them. They're working independently.
yeah, and because we're low on time, I wanted to couple more things. I had this quote from a book I read a long time ago. It was by a Yale professor. Um, it was a book called Blueprint: The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society, and he had this quote that always stuck with me. I saved it. Um, because a lot of these psychedelic experiences and their value comes from the sense of awe that they induce in us. And he said, most experiences that induce such a sense of awe prompt us to feel as if we are transcending our usual frame of reference. Some scientists believe that awe is an evolved emotion intended to cause a cognitive shift that reduces egocentricity and makes people feel more connected to others. Responding to powerful natural phenomena like thunderstorms and earthquakes, vast experiences of ice or desert, with the loss of selfishness and an increase in group bonding, might have had survival value to ancient humans. And I also liked your story that you had. You wrote your brother and you climbed into a plane for your birthday flight in the early 1950s, and only 15 minutes of flying over a small town that changed you. Um, so yeah, so could you elaborate more on like?
Well, I had an unusual mother who puts a 6-year-old kid on a 15-minute airplane ride. We took off from a field. It was an old small airplane in a bumpy field. My older brother was terrified. I loved it. But I had an unusual mother who would think this up for a birthday party for a 5 or 6-year-old. But it gave me a different perspective. I found it very magical. And I think he's right about the experience of awe. And there's um, an institute connected to Berkeley where a psychologist is studying awe. And it does elevate it. There is a transcendent quality to it that you can get outside yourself. And it was, I think, Otto Rank who talked about, that may not be right. Might be misquoting, but that there's the trembling side. There's awe and trembling. So sometimes in confrontation with the immensity of of the cosmos, there's awe, and then we can also get shaken to our core. So there's a combination there, but I think it does elevate us out of our egotistical lives. And this was always I mean, this was the hope in the 60s that people would, you know, they would trip and they would change their values. And it didn't really work, did it? It's
No.
not, no, my generation did not really make things a lot better, possibly even worse. So we have to figure out how can we use these medicines in a way that inspires us to protect the environment and all living beings and unseen beings. I mean, how do we begin to behave differently on this planet? And we're hoping the medicines are leading us that way. I was in a conversation with a Shipipo shaman on Zoom, so it was being translated for me. And it was such a sweet thing he said, the medicines are coming to help you. So here's a man in a village on Zoom because he's got, a link, but no bathrooms, no flush toilets. He's in really a village in the jungle. And I'm thinking, and here I am in civilization. We really need this help. And there is this sense of the medicines are coming out of the jungle to help us. And I think we should be listening to them. And some of that is the impact of awe.
Yeah, they have a new term that I think it's a recent term that was coined, egodelics, or ecodelics, sorry. Ecodelics are supposed to be, you know how we have entheogens for substances that induce a religious experience, and then they have ecodelics for psychedelics that induce a sense of like ecology, like your sense of like feeling with nature, close with nature, and to that these things are supposed to induce you to feel more in tune with nature and want to protect it more, that sort of thing. Um, but like, yeah, as you said, it's more complex than just taking a psychedelic and having valuable experiences or feeling less egotistical or feeling more or becoming a more compassionate person. Because we know a lot of people. We hear about ayahuasca shamans who sexually abuse their victims, or you know, that power dynamic, they abuse it.
Yes,
And we'd want to think that all those journeys that they did with ayahuasca would have, prevented that sort of thing. But
we're wrong.
for whatever reason, it didn't.
Yeah.
um,
No guarantee.
yeah, and we know a lot of people, or we hear a lot of people who use psychedelics, you know, in the raves, or we just know they use psychedelics and they haven't changed very
Mm.
much. And it's a very interesting question, like why that is and what distinguishes those individuals from those who do drastically change from these experiences in a positive way. Um, and I don't know if that's where psychedelic integration might come in a little bit, or doing the hard work outside of the experience.
Yes, it's the hard work outside the experience, and hopefully there will be enough resources to support that hard work. But that's the concept behind set your intentions for yourself and for humanity, that there's a higher purpose than just for your own healing. And
Yeah,
yes, it's the hard work outside the ceremony.
yeah, that's why when Timothy, I think it was Timothy Leary, he said he wanted LSD in all of our water systems. So whenever you drink water, you get a little bit of LSD. I think it was him who said that. I could be wrong. That's not going
That
to
sounds just like him. Evidently, it's not going to work.
work.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
so we get to one of your chapters here on discernment. You wrote, medicine hunter Chris Kilham warned about visions that can go wrong. Well, he said, while some are in fact prescient, insightful, revelatory, and wise, other visions are mere head salad. If you're going
Yes,
to
I love
journey,
that phrase.
yeah, like how do you distinguish? I think that's the most important because people get messages all the time from mushrooms or ayahuasca, and any rational person would be like, no, that doesn't sound like wise advice. um, like, how important is that ability to discern, and how does one develop that?
Yeah. Well, um, one standard is you don't just do something because you heard it once. You want to hear, you want to double check a couple of times over a period of months. You want to double check. And it's helpful to know, is this just my own ego?
Hmm.
How well do you know your own ego and your own craziness that you just want to hear this? But the other thing is, if you have that context for the greater good, then you have to ask yourself, is this for the greater good? Or is this somehow just, inflating me? So what- excuse me. So it's, what's the impact on the community, on humanity? I mean, you have to ask these questions of, is this a real contribution? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, and even that can be really difficult because we know, like, all the political debates, all the philosophical, bless you, all the philosophical debates that people have, even like people who are experts in philosophy and political science, they all disagree fundamentally on things that are actually going to improve the world or individuals. Even that can be really challenging to figure out.
Yeah. So you work on your own value system, and then how do you live with that value system?
Yeah, I love how you said in every one of your presentations you'll end with this quote. The way you can like kind of discern, like, is this a good message? Is this? So listen to the message that leads to the love that permeates the universe. Just asking yourself that, is this message in alignment with that?
Yes, that's what I do.
That's
Yeah.
really good.
I think
And
that's a pretty good place to end.
yeah, all
I don't
right.
have anything better to say than that.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Rachel Harris, again for everyone. She's the author of Listening to Ayahuasca and her new book, which I highly recommend. I just finished it, Swimming in the Sacred Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. Please get it from her website or from Amazon and share it with all your friends and family. And again, thank you very much for being on here.
Thank you so much.